topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, Texas, home base for me. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I help companies to articulate their purpose and build inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant workplace. There, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, grow to their fullest potential, and want to stick around in such a gratifying workplace. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Now let's get into today's program. With us is Carolyn Stern, the president and CEO of EI Experience, an executive leadership development and emotional intelligence training firm. She is a certified emotional intelligence and leadership development expert, professional speaker, and university professor. She's the author of The Emotionally Strong Leader, an inside-out journey to transformational leadership, which we'll be talking about today. Carolyn, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Hey, behind you, that beautiful set of books. I have one too. Look at this beautiful thing you created. It's gorgeous. I don't know if you're a parent or not, Carolyn, but I will tell you, as I often say to my fellow authors, bringing a book into the world is actually harder than bringing a child into the world.
It felt like that, although I've never had children, but it certainly was inside of me for more than 9 months.
Right. Me too. Right. Mine as well. So I want to really congratulate you on really beautifully situating yourself and where this book really came from and really sharing your own personal journey. It's just beautiful. It's just great to really know and you know this because of your content, but it was so beautiful to get to know you and your story. But since our readers, our listeners and viewers haven't yet read your book, and I have, would you tell us, and situate where this book came from, your own immediate experience of growing up, as you say, someone who was a sensitive, and still is a sensitive person?
Yeah, I think growing up, Elise, I was sick and tired of hearing that being emotional was a sign of weakness, right? And showing emotion should cause shame. And then in the workplace as a consultant and a trainer and a coach, I was sick and tired of hearing successful leaders like yourself telling me the same story. And I wanted to read a book that you could be emotional and strong. They are not mutually exclusive. So it's really about getting to really emotional. What does that mean? That means feeling things deeply, right? That's all it means. And I feel things deeply, but I'm also a very strong business person. And so I can make rational decisions. The challenge for me is early on in my youth, as well as in my 20s, I let my emotions run amok and I wasn't in the driver's seat of my emotions. So I decided to spend 20 years of studying, because you certainly don't learn this in schools. And I wanted to teach people how to be in that driver's seat of their emotions, that they could take the power back. And by the way, when I say emotionally strong, what I mean is I don't mean strong arming your feelings or having a steely resolve not to feel. What I mean is for you to be aware that you feel things, that your emotions have incredible amounts of insight and information if we take the time to pay attention to what our emotions are telling us. And so my two favorite questions, as you know in the book, that I say, what are you feeling? And what is that feeling telling you about you? If you can answer those two questions throughout your day, you can have a lot more insight and power into how you're feeling and what you can do about how you're feeling, about what you're feeling.
Beautiful way to situate this, Carolyn. So what I also want to call out, which I think is so great. So a lot of our listeners and viewers are really out to create a couple of things. One, either they want to better steward their organizations so that people do want to come to work for them and give their best, or they're on their own journey to try to be able to find more meaningful work or their own purpose. So I want to call out that, we've had people on the show talking about experiential intelligence, that when you look at your own unique set of experience, that there lies something in that experience that only you could understand because of your unique experience and response to it. And that's certainly, from my vantage point, what has happened for you. You have had a front row seat on, an intense diet of emotions, and you've learned something very, very powerful about them. In fact, I love what you say in your book in the beginning, when you tell your story, and you say, now is about the time when you go back and you flip to the back of the book to look at my biography, which I thought was just so funny. So say a little bit about all this training that you've done to prepare yourself for this.
Yeah, you're right. In one of the chapters, I say you might now at this point want to flip back to the bio and say, who gave you these credentials? Well, honestly, it wasn't a degree. Right? It wasn't, I have 5 degrees, but none of them are in, I don't have a degree in emotional intelligence. What I do have is a lot of gumption for the last 20 years to study psychology, business, and leadership, and to realize that people want something different from our leaders, right? So we're no longer wanting the stoic, unflappable leader that doesn't show emotion. We don't want the leader that is that horrible, angry, scary leader that we're scared to do anything in the workplace. Time is up for those leaders. That is failed leadership. What we want is for our leaders to really connect with us on a deeper level. And when we look at the younger generation, for instance, which isn't in my book, the younger generation is lower at problem solving, lower at stress tolerance, and lower at independence than any generation before. Why? Because they grew up with phones and helicopter parents. And so you need to teach these young people, the worst thing you can do as a leader is to give them the answers and not teach them. They need to become emotionally resilient. And so I was one person in 2020, when the heat of the pandemic happened, I was actually saying what no one else was saying. I was saying there was a silver lining. And I'm not discrediting the lost lives, the lost jobs, the isolation that lay bare. What I'm saying is it gave these young people an opportunity to learn to be emotionally resilient, because Google and their parents didn't know how to live through a pandemic. So they had to figure it out themselves. So I think it's really about teaching people that emotions, as painful as they can be, and it's hard to be an objective bystander, if we can be an observer of ourselves and say, hey, here's what I'm feeling. What is this feeling telling me about me? And how can I press pause and create a space between what I want to do innately and my reaction and versus what is the smart thing to do? And that's really what emotional intelligence is. It's being intelligent about your emotions.
Beautifully said. Just gorgeous. So, as you know, I read the book cover to cover, your book's cover to cover for all my guests. And, that's part of my way to learn and grow too, Carolyn. You are part of my ongoing study and development by doing this and then talking about the books on the air. So one of the things that I am very aware of in the work that I do, and even just one of the last books that I wrote, which is called Coloring Life, it's a book about loss and how you transform through loss. What I talk about there is just how underdeveloped our feeling vocabulary is, right? We have a limited space to say, okay, so I'm mad. Okay, so I'm really frustrated. But there's an abundance of things that could happen in between that. And so learning, part of what I'm trying to do in the work that I'm doing, Carolyn, around the space of meaning and purpose, is to be able to, like in similar vein like you, I think, is to encourage people to get access to and snuggle up with their feelings instead of shutting them down, right? So
as the young people say, feel the feels. Feel the feels.
Yes, they do say that. My daughter's 20. She totally says that. Yeah.
Yes. So feel the feels. And I think that's a really good point. What is the difference between frustration and anger? I mean, when you think about those two feelings, we feel those all day long. But the causal difference between frustration is unmet expectations. The causal difference between, what creates anger is maybe an injustice or unfairness. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, you and I both know how many of us, me included, have been frustrated but shown it as anger, right? Yes. Lots of us in the workplace. And then the problem is, as you know, Elise, people judge the behavior. and then they just attribute an emotion to it. They don't even think to ask you because they don't want to open Pandora's box. They think you're angry at work. They see you stomping down the hall. They assume that you're angry. But what if you're not angry? And could we as leaders start to be brave and start talking about these conversations at work? And I call them in the book the inner iceberg conversations, all the things that lay beneath the surface, right? All the things, what killed the Titanic was not that little piece of ice above the waterline. What killed the Titanic was that huge piece of ice below the waterline. Well, people are a lot like that. What you see is just the tip of the iceberg. You don't know my assumptions, my motivations, my fears, my stressors, my biases. All of those things are below the surface. And so unless I'm talking to my employees about these things, I'm missing the boat. I'm not hitting to getting to the root cause of what makes them tick, what makes them who they are.
Oh, so yummy. Two things. So first, to me, what you're presencing is there's such an opportunity for all of us, and certainly leaders, to be able to develop a bigger capacity to, drink in the richness of what it is to be a human, right? To be able to get present to that, to elicit it, to evoke it, and to dance with it and celebrate it and understand it. There's such a beautiful opportunity, and I would say invitation to do that, to elevate your capacity as a leader. That's the first thing I'm getting from what you're saying. And then the second thing is, I love what you say in your book, is you say that emotions are not the enemy. They are a superpower. Could you say more about this superpower that we have?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, before we are managers or leaders or employees, we're human, and humans are full of feelings. And, it's about learning to accept that we feel things, understand that they provide incredible insights into how we see the world and how we see ourselves. And what you can do is, if you can start to not be so afraid to open Pandora's box and find out what's lurking inside. Here's one of the things I always tell people, all leaders: you do not need to be anyone's emotional therapist. First of all, you're not qualified. Let's get real. And second of all, it's really just being brave to say, hey, Elise, I see you're stomping down the hall today. The story I'm telling myself is that you're angry. Is that correct? And you might say, no, I'm actually not angry. I'm frustrated. Well, tell me more about your frustration. What's that from? And then they say, well, my boss gave me an unrealistic deadline. Okay, Elise, well, let's talk about that. How are you feeling? How can I support you? I'm not having to solve your problems. You're then telling me what you need for me to support you through this emotion. I don't need to figure out. And this is the problem that I think leaders forget. And as a university professor, I will tell you, leaders are teachers. Leaders are teachers.
Yes, they are. Agreed.
And they absolutely do not need to give people the answers. I know my students' answers to their test, but if I give it to them, they ain't learning. The worst thing I can do is give them the answers. So the worst thing you can do as a leader is come in and save the day with your problem-solving hero cape and try to be the hero. You don't need to do that. All you have to do is ask really good questions so that you empower your employees to figure out the answers themselves. And again, when we think about if these younger generation have lower independence, the worst thing we can do is to give them the answers, because all we're doing is creating a culture of dependence. We need to cut that cord.
All right. I'm right there with you, Carolyn. Let's get out there and make this happen. And on that note, let's take our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Carolyn Stern. She is the president and CEO of EI Experience, an executive leadership and development and emotional intelligence training firm. We've been talking about her new book, The Emotionally Strong Leader. Stay with us. We've got more to cover.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at EliseCortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. Before we get back into the program, I do want to invite you to check out the tour to build a community of purpose and joy. We are kicking it off March 22nd here in Dallas. That's my backyard, and then going on to Fort Worth on March 29th, and then taking it across the nation to another 31 cities. And so I'll say more about that in the next break here, but just check out elisecortez.com/books. You'll see the schedule there. Come and join us for the community. I think it'll be a lot of fun. If you're just now joining the program today, my guest is Carolyn Stern. She is the author of The Emotionally Strong Leader, an Inside Out Journey to Transformational Leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So let's keep going. This is so rich and yummy what you're giving us, Carolyn. I just really appreciate how you articulate this stuff. And I did fail to mention that I think you're calling in from Vancouver, Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
I love your accent. I'm from the Northwest. Every once in a while, people think I'm Canadian too.
As I say, process versus process.
Yes, all of those things. And just if I'm a little bit tired, it just kind of creeps up a little bit to the further Canadian border. So I want to get a little bit deeper here. We've been talking about the benefits of really understanding, or the importance of understanding our feelings. But then you go on and talk about why it's important to really honor and fully feel our feelings.
Yes. Yes. So you don't want to dodge your feelings. You want to give them an opportunity to create that mental space and clarity. And again, I think this is the challenge, right? We tend to suppress our feelings, right? If we don't want to feel it, we either ignore it or pretend that doesn't exist or suppress them. And so really what happens with suppressed feelings is they can bottle up. And I mean, what COVID provided us with is it made us realize that we are human. Our feelings erupted from the surface. People didn't know how to deal with them. And this is why, I started EI Experience in 2017. And I had to convince people what emotional intelligence was and why they needed my training. Now, let's be honest, Elise, the phones are ringing off the hook. Why? Because COVID shined a light on the fact that we are not equipped to deal with our emotions or that of our employees. And we really need to teach people not to be so afraid of feelings. They're not the enemy. You can make friends with your feelings. And then once you make friends with your feelings, let's get to the heart of them. Let's figure out why they're there and where they came from. And so that's really figuring out what triggered us, and then I actually have a worksheet that I give my clients, which is take a sheet of paper, break down the sheet of paper into 4 different columns. The first column, here's my emotion. The second column is what's the trigger. The third column is what's my response. And the fourth column is what's my impact. And so let's take an example as I gave you before. Let's say you got triggered and you're angry because your boss gave you an unrealistic expectation. So the trigger is an unrealistic expectation or deadline. The emotion is anger. Well, your response could be 2. You could do a high EQ response or a low EQ response. A high EQ response would be, hey boss, I can get you this project done, but that other project, that'll have to wait until the following week. So the impact of that response your boss might not love your answer, but they'll respect you for setting a boundary. Mm-hmm. Now, a low EQ response could be, screw you, boss. Well, right. The impact could be, hey, I could lose my job, or insubordination, right? I could be written up. And so by writing it out, both a high and a low EQ response and impact, that gives me clarity on what I can do about it. It creates that pause button. I press pause, and then I can make a conscious choice.
So good. In fact, I want to echo that and take it one step further from what you say directly in your book, because I think this adds so much power as well. You say the more you allow yourself to accept, experience, and face your true feelings versus judging them, the more energy you have to dedicate to your life. Yes. That sounds pretty good to me, Carolyn.
Yeah. I think the problem is, emotional intelligence is being curious rather than judgmental.
Yes.
So get curious about why I'm feeling this way and get to why. Answer the why. Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Where does that come from? And if we can do that without judgment or criticism, then we can shine a light on what's really going on for us. And I run a lot of these workshops, and I meet people that are in their 60s and 70s and say, you know what? I never even thought to ask myself these questions.
I know exactly what you mean. And then we take it one step further. I've actually had Dr. Neha Sangwan on my show. She wrote Talk RX. And anyway, she's a colleague and friend. And she also quotes John Bradshaw, as you do, in his book, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And you say also, like she does, she says, you say emotions are energy in motion. They are the energy that moves us. That's our human fuel. Feelings need a way out. And if energy is not expressed, it is repressed and bottled up. I think that really opens something, Carol, when we recognize that our emotions are literally energy moving through our body. I think that really gives it makes them less invisible almost.
Yes. And you know what? On a personal note, Elise, and as you read in the book, I was eating about my feelings. That's how I dealt with them.
Yes.
So when I repressed them, I ate about them. And I was able to finally, when I started to talk about them, started to deal with them face on, that's when I was able to shed, like, as I said, 100 pounds in the book. And since the book came out, I've lost another 25 pounds. So 125 pounds I've lost because I'm now dealing with my feelings. For me, I would eat about them.
And that's really powerful. And I also really appreciate you sharing everything about yourself. And it really does go to illustrate the power of emotions, the importance of emotions, and listening to what it is they're telling us. And that's another thing that you talk about too in the book, is really trying to ask your emotions, what are you trying to tell me? What is this? And what a different stance to relate to our emotions or our feelings when we actually were to treat them as a respected entity. Something that has something to offer our lives and to enrich our lives, versus, as you say, versus something to bottle or pummel down.
Yes. And I think that's really why I wanted to write the book, is that, we're hiding so much of who we are. We're both emotional and rational creatures. So if we're basically saying you need to put a mask on or turn your emotions off and like a switch, there is no on and off switch, right? We feel things all day long. And you said yourself, there's thousands of emotions out there, but I'd be curious to hear what your listeners, how many emotions, if I said to you, you have 10 seconds, write down all the emotions you can think of, I guarantee that emotion list would be very small. Why? Because the education system is focusing so much on IQ and very little to do with EQ. It took me 5 years at my own university to lobby to get an emotional intelligence program in the School of Business for an accredited course. Why? Because my faculty told me it wasn't academic enough. Well, you and I both know. Well, first of all, Yale has a Center of Emotional Intelligence. So let's start there. If we talk about academia, that's the cream of the crop at Yale. But also, I think that the key is to realize that this isn't just like a soft skill, a mushy skill. This has science behind it. We are using our prefrontal cortex to be smarter than that damn amygdala that gets fired off and thinks we're in danger. All we're really doing with emotional intelligence is trying to be smarter, use that prefrontal cortex part of our brain, the thinking brain. It needs to be stronger and bigger than that little emotional brain in the back.
Oh, that almost was worth the price of admission right there, Carolyn. That was so yummy. And I wanted to take it another step further for our listeners and viewers, because you mentioned the science.
Yes.
And you talk specifically how when we feel strong negative emotions like fear or anger, our brains secrete cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which affects that prefrontal cortex and inhibits it from processing information, which is exactly what you were saying, but that's the science behind it.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really critical. So if you wanted to comment to that, and then I want to go to the positive side too.
Well, yeah. And like think about it, when you have negative emotions, like in fact, one of the studies I quoted in the book is stress tends to be a secondary emotion. A lot of times when we feel stress and anger, or sorry, not stress, anger is a secondary emotion. A lot of times when we feel anger, we kind of think that that's the main emotion, but there's something underneath that anger. So if we can get to the heart of what's underneath that anger, I think the problem is a lot of people display anger and everyone's so afraid of what that anger means, we don't get to the heart of the issue. So if we can understand what triggers our emotions, and that's the key. So whether it is, hey, listen, do you not like people being late? Do you not like being interrupted? Is entitlement a trigger? What are your triggers? Once you figure out what triggers you ahead of time before you actually get triggered, then you can do something about it. Listen, when I get an email and someone puts the word should or I deserve it, I want to punch them. And guess what? That's not emotionally intelligent, right? So I need to realize that is a trigger for me and not when I get an email with the word should or deserve in it, I need to step back and say, okay, I'm just triggered. This has nothing to do with the person that's sending me the email. This is a big trigger of mine. Why? Because my father had a lot of entitlement. So this brings back a whole history of what entitlement means to me. So if I can separate myself from that, then I can do something about it.
Oh, indeed. And so then if we take this actually straight into the workplace, this, of course, what we've been talking about is everywhere in life. But if we now take it into the workplace, you then go on and say, if emotions are not acknowledged at work, they can become unhinged and be detrimental to an organization, leading to high turnover. This is all critical. This is the pain points: low productivity, lousy communication, interpersonal conflicts, and poor morale and low employee engagement. So this stuff translates directly to the bottom line if we don't actually address this and improve it.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. I always say to people, if you could ask 3 questions to every employee, it would be these questions. What do you need to feel connected to me and the team? What do you need to feel appreciated for your efforts? And what do you need to feel fulfilled in your role? And then I shut up and listen, because that gives me the wisdom on how to lead them. So I'll give you an example. I have an employee right now, Natalie. She likes to talk to me once a week, whereas Kieran needs to only connect with me she needs to connect with me once a day. For Natalie, she likes to be appreciated with quality time. Kieran likes to be appreciated with words of affirmation. Natalie likes to feel fulfilled in her role with work-life balance. Kieran likes to take a course. Well, if I know each of these things about my employees, that gives me a roadmap on how to lead them. But unless I'm asking those deeper inner iceberg conversations, I am probably, let's be honest, like golf, I'm trying to use one golf club to play golf. Well, that doesn't work, right? You need a lot of different golf clubs. You have to change your strategy depending on whom you're working with. So once I know who I'm working with, then and figuring out what roadmap they need for me to lead them, then I can do something powerful.
I completely agree, and I want to comment on that, and I will, but let's take our next break here. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Carolyn Stern. She's a certified emotional intelligence and leadership development expert, professional speaker, and university professor. We've been talking about her magnificent book. After the break, we're going to finish this segment up here, really talking and bringing it home about how to use emotional intelligence in leadership to be more effective and get the results that you want.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I mentioned in the last break that we're launching the tour to build a community of purpose and joy. The latest 2 books that I have that are coming out are part of that whole experience. And one is called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And the other one is Coloring Life, How Loss Invites Us to Live More Vibrant Life. So that's part of the experience built into some of the events. So that's some of the undergird to it. If you're now just joining us, my guest is Carolyn Stern. She's the author of The Emotionally Strong Leader, An Inside-Out Journey to Transformational Leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So the bit that I wanted to comment on from the last segment you finished on, when you mentioned, how your two team members, I'm guessing that just a few of the listeners and viewers were going, sounds like a lot of work, and it isn't, but it's so, when you know your people and you really understand them. And I love how you just come straight to asking them. Don't try to guess and assume, and it's not a one size fits all, but asking those 3 simple questions is gold.
Yes. And I think that, yes, it might be a lot of upfront work, but it saves so much time in the end, because if I can make my employees feel appreciated in a language that they hear, then I'm doing my job right. If I am wasting my breath and speaking in a different language that they don't understand, then it's going to go on deaf ears.
Yeah, absolutely. So then from here, I wanted to finish out the program really talking about, emotionally intelligent leadership in action and being an emotionally strong leader in action. And one of the things, of course, we know, listeners and viewers, is everybody wants to matter. Everybody really wants to make some kind of an impact that is unique and important to them. So one of the things that I appreciate about your book, Carolyn, is you talk about the impact of emotionally intelligent leaders. And if you would just say a little bit more, you gave us something in the very first segment about that, but if you could just bring that home in terms of the impact and how they really make a difference for people at work.
Well, I think it's what we need today are leaders who embrace their feelings, right? We need to understand ourselves from the inside out, which is why I called the book The Inside Out Journey to Transformational Leadership. You have to understand why you do what you do. You need to understand your emotional makeup. I, for instance, Elise, am really strong in flexibility, but I'm on the dark side. I over accommodate. Well, that coupled with my fact that I have low independence, which means I care too much about what people think, is not a great combination because I flip-flop my ideas depending on what my employees want. Sometimes I need to lower my flexibility, take a stand, be more stringent, and care less about what everyone thinks. That's the work that I need to do. But if we understand our emotional makeup and use that data of the data that our feelings provide, that will help us make informed, rational decisions, especially when the stakes are high. And that's really what we're trying to do. And I'm not saying that emotionally strong leaders need to be perfect. And in fact, just this last week, I didn't have a great week. And I let my emotions run amok. And I actually took it out on my staff. I could tell that I was stressed and my stress was coming out in my actions. Well, guess what I did this week? In my team meeting, I told them I got really emotional and I said, you know what? I'm an emotional intelligence expert and I'm letting you know that I had a bad week because that doesn't mean that I have to be perfect. I let my emotions run amok and I apologize. And I really want to say how much my actions have impacted me, that I've lost sleep about it. Anyways, I got all teary-eyed. Well, guess what? My youngest employee, the one that has been with the company the least, wrote me an email saying how inspired she was, that I owned I admitted publicly when I made a mistake. I owned it. I asked for forgiveness and told them that I was going to be better. This isn't about being perfect. That's the whole point. We are human. I don't think we're going to ever become a master of our feelings. I think what we need to do is learn to be better and stronger than our feelings for more times than less. I think this whole black and white thinking, if I'm perfect, then I'll be great, gets in our way. When we make mistakes, we learn from it. So I learned a big, valuable lesson this last week. When I'm overly stressed, I need to take a pause. I do not maybe need to have a team meeting on those days. Maybe I need to break and calm myself down and go for a walk and cool myself down before I have a meeting and get frustrated on my team. Because we still can show, we can't be, and I wrote it in the book, being emotional is unprofessional, but having emotions is not. We all have emotions. It's the way we communicate that's important.
A couple of things that you said there that are really powerful, Carolyn. So one is that, you also say this in the book too, is in just what you shared in your experience with your team this week. So you say it in the book and you did it right there with your team, is you just modeled the way for them to confidently speak up in meetings and encouraging everyone to do the same, being able to share and speak to their feelings and their emotions without apologizing for them, but not letting them derail them. And so I think it's important that we're recognizing it. Now we've really moved into, this is the stuff, what it looks like in action. And that's really important for our listeners and viewers are like, and then what's the so what part here? What's this look like in action? How does this actually make a difference? Well, now you've instead of maybe what would have happened is if she hadn't come back and said this, maybe she would have lost part of her team.
Sure.
Right?
I think the key is, Elise, is to really ask your people how you're feeling. So every single meeting we have, we start with a one-word feeling check-in. I don't need a whole story about why you're feeling what you're feeling, but if anyone says something alarming, like I'm overwhelmed or I'm stressed, I might have some side conversations with those people, but that will give me a really good idea of what's the temperature of my team and where they're at, because how they feel affects how they perform. So number one, as an actionable item, ask them how they're feeling. The second is, if you make a mistake like I did, admit publicly when you make a mistake, right? Ask for input and help. You do not need to be this stoic leader that has all the answers. You are human just like the rest of us, and you are fallible. And so the thing is, you'll make mistakes. I ask my team, what am I doing well? What am I not doing so well? Ask for constructive feedback. Don't just say, did you like that? Because that's a yes and no question, right? They can answer. It's a closed-ended question. They can say yes and no, end of conversation. But what am I doing really well? What am I not doing so well? You can also ask them to, like you said, confidently speak up in meetings. Get them to encourage others to do the same. There is no wrong answer. Some of our interns, our student interns, we get them to give their opinion because they're fresh off in the company. They don't know what's going on. That fresh perspective might open a whole idea that I haven't even thought of. So it's those things about challenging, getting people to speak up and speak their truth, really, is what we're trying to encourage.
And I think this one sentence you have here just really brings it home. So for listeners and viewers, what Carolyn says here is, she says, emotionally strong leaders commit to noticing, articulating, and regulating their emotions so their teams will do the same. So they commit to noticing, articulating, and regulating their emotions. That is so powerful and very accessible.
Absolutely. It's just admitting when you feel something, acknowledging where that comes from, or expressing it in a constructive way, and then managing it. And now that sounds easy, but it's not always that simple, right? I think it really is about learning the strategies, the mental strategies to be bigger and stronger than our emotions. And that's what the book gives you. I lay out 60 different strategies on what they could do to improve their emotional intelligence.
I don't know how you're going to respond to this, but it occurs to me to ask. So I had a conversation with a young person that I work with who's 20, and this is part of a team process here. And she told me that she's taken to naming with actual names her feelings, or sort of when she. So apparently Peggy showed up today for her, and I'm like, tell me about Peggy. And she's like, Peggy is grumpy, and she has bad days, and she doesn't act well, she doesn't respond well, and so Peggy showed up today. And I actually thought it was really kind of interesting. What's your take on that?
I love that. In fact, I actually name the voices in my head very similar to what your employee does. Yes. I think if you can name them and separate it from yourself, I'd say the longest time I thought my emotions were all of me, but they are not all of me. They are just part of me. And so I name the little voices. Mine are Pathetic Polly and Empowered Angelina. And when I've got Pathetic Polly in my head telling me all the reasons why I can't do what I think I can do, I just need to make sure Empowered Angelina is the louder voice I listen to. Who am I giving airtime to? And it goes back to, do I want to feed the weeds or feed the flowers? I love that your employee is actually naming them, because once she can name them, then she can tame them. And she realizes that they are separate from herself. They're still part of her, but they're not all of her. And if she can then say, hey, what does my prefrontal cortex tell me to do about Peggy? My thinking part of my brain, what can they do about Peggy? That actually will give her, a lot of times when I'm coaching, and I'm sure you feel the same, Elise. Today, I just asked a student they were going through a problem, and I asked them, what advice would you give someone that's going through the same problem you would? The moment it was an objective person they could think of rather than themselves, then they had clarity. Yes. So a lot of times it's just separating yourself from the problem and seeing yourself as bigger than that problem.
I really don't want to let you go. This is just too yummy. We're getting close to the end of the show here, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to talk about what's a big part of your book, which is your 6-step EI experience self-coaching to enhanced emotional intelligence model. Could you just kind of walk us briefly through the 6 steps? You just started it there in the end, but if you could walk us through, that'd be great.
Well, step 1 is connect with yourself. So this is about you taking a good, honest look in the mirror and seeing what you're good at and what you're not good at, but in a non-judgmental way. So to have compassion. Okay. Number 2, which is really important, is consult with others, because your self-perception is inevitably flawed, right? How you see yourself might not be how others see you. And again, my whole life, I was told I was emotional. Well, guess what? Now I'm making a living out of it. So, it doesn't, my weakness is in fact what actually the world thinks is a weakness, right? I might use it as a strength. The third step is you've got to clarify your focus. So once you take what you see, how you see yourself and how others see you, then you can really focus on, what do I need to work on? What are the things that are getting in my way of being my best self? The fourth step is consider your possibilities and barriers. And this is about you brainstorming all the possibilities to get you closer to your goal, but also what's going to get in your way of reaching that goal. The fifth step is crafting an action plan. This is really about coming up with a bite-sized chunks of how are you going to, reach your goal? What does that look like? Setting near-term and long-term goals and setting target dates for completion. And the last step is confirm your commitment. This is how committed are you? How motivated are you? Do you need support? Do you need an accountability partner? How are you going to get that strength and support? And the one thing that I didn't say in the fifth step that we plan with the action plan is you got to plan for relapse, because you are going to relapse. So this isn't a straight line. You're going to relapse. And what are you going to do in case you relapse to get yourself back on track?
Oh my gosh. And then I don't know if you said number 6 yet, confirm your commitment and choose your conversation.
So confirm your commitment and close your conversation. This is about you really saying, here's how committed I am. Here's what I'm going to do to ensure that I've got commitment. Figuring out who I need for support. So maybe you're my accountability partner that can help me. Maybe you have high independence and I don't. I can look to you for guidance when I'm struggling with independence challenges. And then, making sure you keep your motivation level up and that you stick to your plan.
Mm-hmm. Gorgeous. And listeners and viewers, I've read the book. It is chock full of resources, tools for you. This is something else. This is very impressive work. She is very generous in the book. So 2 things real quick on that. First, I wanted to be able to say that, as a Gallup certified strengths coach, I often do workshops, and part of what I'll say to the crowd is, I want you to all go back and think about when you were very young. People labeled you as, doing things wrong, usually because it was different from the way that they did them. And you were all told you're too, and then there's a negative adjective behind the word too. For you, it was probably too sensitive, right? So what I tell them is I say, well, good news, whatever's behind the word too is the beginning of your genius. No one's ever going to take this out of you, ever. So your opportunity is to figure out, where can I really use this in the world? Where can I bring it and develop it and serve from it? And I think because so many of our listeners are interested in meaning and purpose, what you've given us, Carolyn, is the window to just how you've done that so beautifully.
Well, thank you. And I think I love the 2, right? I think that's the problem. I mean, think about if we let the world tell us what, Michael Jordan was kicked off the basketball team. Walt Disney was told he wasn't creative. I think the whole point is we cannot let the world dictate what is our genius. And my genius is I'm an emotional person, and I'm using that for good, not for evil. I have just learned to become stronger and bigger than my emotions so that they're not running amok. I'm still feeling things deeply. I just now have the cognitive strategies to feel things deeply and know what to do about it, constructively and professionally and respectfully. And that's really the key.
Well, that was the second point I wanted to make, Carolyn, is that what I want to really acknowledge and celebrate in you, and for all the listeners and viewers that are watching this or hearing this, is we are present to, I'm present to the bigness, the fullness of your person because of the work that you've done with emotions. I mean, there's a depth there, there's a breadth there that is so beautiful and accessible. And I can see that's where you serve from. And I just really want to celebrate that.
Thank you so much. And one thing that I didn't do, and if I were to write the book again, I don't know if you noticed, but at the very back of that book, there is a QR code. And if you click on that QR code, it takes you to a whole other website that gives you, it's a book and a half. I didn't ever write about it. There's nothing in the book that talks about this QR code, but it's a book and a half because it gives you 7 videos of me as well as an entire workbook. So as much as the book is half of the book is a workbook that people can write in, there's an additional workbook and 7 other videos that come along with the book. So they're getting a book and a half.
Love it, my dear. That's what we call commitment, dedication, and passion. I love it. Well, this show, as you probably know, is listened to by people across the world, and they're really out to develop workplaces where people can really thrive and become their best. They are led by inspirational leaders who lead them to their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave them with today?
I think if I could tell every business leader who's struggling to get the results they want one thing, it would be this: don't be afraid of your emotions, yours or your team's. As I said in the book, feelings are not facts. They're just feelings. Do you remember that song, Feelings, Nothing More?
Nothing more than feelings, yes.
Right? They're not good or bad, right or wrong. They're just simply an emotional experience or reaction to a person, thing, or situation. And even though our feelings are incredibly powerful, they are full of wisdom if you can look for it. So I think what we really need to do is just genuinely understand what your emotions are telling you about you, where they come from, and why they're there. And if we can start doing that, using our emotions as data to learn more about ourselves, others in the world, that's where we can make a difference. I think if your organizations that are listening and people that are listening from those organizations invest in emotional intelligence training. It's the reason why I started my company. I absolutely think that we do not have an emotional education in our school system. So we need to start now. And as you saw in the book, I am seeing the problems that we are graduating these students, and it is plaguing the modern workforce. If they don't have assertiveness in school, they ain't going to have assertiveness at work. And so if we don't teach them how to speak up when someone in their group doesn't do their fair share of the work, they're not going to speak up in the boardroom. And so we need to start teaching them these simple skills. Although they're not easy, they're simple. If we can start teaching our youth these skills, the world of work in the future is going to be so much better for it.
That's the world that I want to live in. Carolyn, it is an absolute delight to know you. And I tend to, once I'm connected with my guest, if I'm in Vancouver, I could be on your back doorstep. So just be ready.
Love it.
Okay. Listeners and viewers, if you want more of Carolyn Stern, want to learn more about her books, or her work, there's 2 websites you can visit. You can go to Carolyn Stern. Let me spell that for you. It's Carolyn Stern, Stern. Or the other website is eiexperience.com, as an emotional intelligence experience. So eiexperience.com. Either way, you'll learn something more about her. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can catch it recorded podcast. We were on the air with Bill Murphy talking about his new book, Thriving in the Storm, 9 Principles to Help You Overcome Any Adversity. He shared his own very remarkable journey navigating life and what it's taught him about overcoming and moving through adversity. Next week, we'll be on the air with Jim Lair and Sheila Olson-Walker talking about their book, Wise Decisions, a science-based approach to making better choices. See you there. And remember, work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.